Hello class! Today we're going to be lecturing about Lesson 3. Lesson 3 is going to contain two videos. The first is going to be cellular organelle review, so all the organelles found within inside your cells. And then the second video is going to be over cell cytology and cell diversity, so all the specialized cells found within your body. So just a quick reminder that cells are the smallest unit of life. We learned that back in Lesson 1 when looking at our structural organization. And the cell was kind of being discovered by all these different scientists at one time using primitive microscopes, but Robert Hooke is the scientist that gave the cell its name, so that's why we say that he's the one that really gets credit for it. He looked at cork cells, like cork you'd find in a wine cork, like corking a bottle, and that's when he discovered that these plant cells kind of look like little cells that people would stay in. Cells are made of 4 different elements, primarily anyways, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, and are about 60% water. So cells are going to vary in length, vary in shape, and vary in function. They can be very small. You can see erythrocytes or red blood cells. They're very tiny, or they can grow very long, like nerve cells. That's the bottom picture. In your legs, they can grow over 3 feet long. When you look at those two cells over there, you can tell that they're definitely not the same shape, and those two cells definitely don't have the same function. So I want you to look at that picture there in the bottom right. You've probably seen a picture like this before. This is what we call a generalized cell. This is the cell that you're going to see in textbooks that basically just outline all the different organelles and all the organelle functions. Cells don't necessarily look like this. They're not particularly really round, and they don't have all these unified organelles. It's a lot more complicated than this. But this is the cell that we kind of look at when starting to study all of these different functions. So first, let's look at the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of the cell. It contains DNA, which is the blueprint to make all of the proteins in your body. DNA, remember, is what you inherit from your parents to express your different traits. So right now, maybe you have blonde hair or brown hair. That is coming from the genes found within your DNA to make the proteins to give you that brown or blonde hair. Once a cell has lost or ejected its nucleus, it's programmed to die, and the nucleus always isn't a round organelle. It's going to conform to the shape of the cell. So surrounding the nucleus, you have the nuclear membrane or nuclear envelope. And within this nuclear membrane, you have tiny little pores that allow substances to come in and out of the cell. And if you look at our picture here, there's a nuclear pore. It's a little hole within this nuclear membrane. So we have things like RNA entering and exiting. We also have ribosomes entering and exiting. The nucleolus is found within the nucleus, and it's a really dense region inside the nucleus, and that's where you actually make ribosomes. And then when your DNA is relaxed and you're not making proteins, it's called chromatin. Once we want to divide, or the cell divide, it condenses into what we call chromosomes. Next is the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is your cell membrane, so it surrounds every single cell in your body and separates the cell from the outside environment. This is an overall picture of your cell membrane. A lot of times when people think of the cell membrane, they just think of this phospholipid bilayer, which are lipids coming together to form the cell membrane. But it's a lot more than that. Your cell membrane is extremely complex with a bunch of different carbohydrates and proteins running through it to allow things in and out of your cell. So that plasma membrane is going to be surrounded by that phospholipid bilayer. It's what we talked about right here. So here's a phospholipid and here's a phospholipid, so that's why we call it a bilayer. It also has microvilli surrounding it. These are little tiny shaggy hairs that greatly increase the cell's surface area. And your cell membrane also contains different types of junctions. One of the most important ones that we talk about quite a lot are tight junctions, this top one here. So tight junctions are basically when cells bind together, they are creating an impermeable layer. So this is when you want cells to kind of stick together. And don't want anything to pass between them. So we find this a lot of times like in our skin cells because we don't want anything leaking out of our skin. Then we have desmosomes. These are made by protein filaments, and these protein filaments basically anchor cells down to the tissue below. You're going to find desmosomes on the inside of your mouth. So that it anchors the cells down, because that's a lot of wear and tear within your mouth. You're swallowing, you're drinking, you're eating. It's a lot of stress on those cells. And then gap junctions are the last membrane junction that we're going to talk about. And gap junctions allow ions to pass between cells. Ions are going to be charged particles. So throughout this course, you're going to see things like calcium, Ca+2. That's an ion because it has a charge to it. Or you're going to see a lot of sodium, Na+. And gap junctions allow those ions to kind of pass in between the cells. So if you look, these are outlining the different junctions that we were talking about. This picture over here is representing a gap junction. So here's our connexon, that's a protein right there. And it's got a hollow tube going through it. And this allows ions, so these would be our ions. This one would be like, let's say, calcium, Ca+2. +2. So this would allow this calcium to kind of go in between these two different cells, and we find this a lot of times in our cardiac muscle within the heart. All right, going over here, this is our tight junction. So the tight junction, look, it literally creates a kind of impermeable barrier. It's like gluing those two cells together so that nothing can get in between the two cells. And then the last one that we talked about was a desmosome. Desmosomes are represented by these guys right here. These are proteins that are literally sticking the cells together and anchoring them together so that they can kind of resist a lot of wear and tear. The plasma membrane also contains cholesterol. Cholesterol helps the cells communicate within each other, and it helps stabilize your cell membrane. And then your plasma membrane also has lots and lots of different proteins scattered throughout that lipid bilayer. Channel proteins are literally a channel in and out of the cell. It's allowing water and small ions like those calcium ions and sodium ions we talked about. There's enzymes that speed up the chemical reactions. We have proteins that come out of the cell membrane that act as kind of receptors for different hormones. And then you also have glycoproteins, which have a sugar group or carbohydrate group attached to them. And these types of proteins help determine your blood type, so A, B, O, and also act as receptors for bacteria. These are the glycoproteins that we just talked about. So you can see they have the pink on them. Those are the sugar groups, and they allow for lots of different things. They determine your blood type, but they also act as receptors for foreign invaders to help you kind of trigger your immune response. All right, then we have the cytoplasm. This is the cellular material outside of the nucleus but inside the plasma membrane. It contains your cytosol, which is the fluid inside of your cell, all of your different organelles, and then inclusions, which are kind of just random items in particular cells. For example, your skin cells contain melanin, and melanin is going to help you tan when you're out in the sun and protect you from those UV rays. So now we're going to get into all the specific organelles. Mitochondria, You often hear it called the powerhouse of the cell, but what does that actually mean? Would you be able to say what does that mean? What does the powerhouse of the cell mean? It means it's forming ATP, and ATP is energy. And that's how you're doing everything right now. Taking notes, that's how you're blinking your eyes. Anything you're really doing right now requires ATP energy, and mitochondria is where that is made. It's got a double membrane. The inside one is kind of the most important one because it's all folded up. It's called cristae. This is where the electron transport chain takes place, and that's where you make a majority of your ATP. Okay, so here's our mitochondria. You can see it has ATP kind of all over it. This is where we make most of our ATP. Kind of looks like a kidney bean, and you can see that this inner membrane here is very folded. This is where the electron transport chain takes place. Ribosomes. Ribosomes are where we make proteins. They're made of proteins and ribosomal RNA made within that nucleolus in the nucleus. They can either be free floating around in the cytosol or attached to another organelle called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So your endoplasmic reticulum is basically a bunch of folded membrane, and it's just membrane folded on top of each other. And it does two different things. We have what we call rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum is where you're going to find your ribosomes, and that's why they call it rough, because it's literally studded with all of these different ribosomes. And the whole purpose of this is to make proteins. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum a lot of times is attached to the nucleus, because the nucleus is where the mRNA is made, which is the directions to make proteins. So it's attached right onto the nucleus and the outside of the nucleus, so that when the mRNA comes out, the ribosomes are right there to make the proteins, where they then bundle it up into a transport vesicle that goes to another location. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum contains no ribosomes, but is very important in making lipids. Remember, lipids are fats. So for example, your liver cell has a lot more of smooth endoplasmic reticulum because the liver cells help to make lipids. All right, the Golgi apparatus. So once proteins are made at your rough endoplasmic reticulum and they leave, it travels to this organelle here. This organelle, again, is just a bunch of membranes folded on top of each other, and their job is to take that newly made protein and modify it. So they can kind of take stuff out of it or add stuff onto it, and then they package it up for its final destination. So once it's ready to leave, it gets inside a vesicle, which is just a little membrane sac, and then it gets shipped towards the plasma membrane so it can leave the cell and go somewhere else. So this picture outlines everything that we just talked about. We make RNA inside of the nucleus. RNA is our directions from protein. For making a protein. It goes to the rough endoplasmic reticulum where a ribosome, this is a ribosome, reads it and makes a protein. The protein, which is represented by this green, then enters into a vesicle. The vesicle travels down to the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus is where that newly made protein is modified. It can add stuff to it, it can take stuff away, it can fold it differently. Travels through the Golgi apparatus where it then gets into another vesicle. The vesicle then travels to the plasma membrane where it fuses with it and leaves the cell to go somewhere else. All right, lysosomes. Lysosomes are just kind of vesicles, they're membranous bags, and they're filled with really powerful digestive enzymes. We often call this the garbage disposal of the cell because it's going to dispose of any worn out organelles, and then it's also going to take care of bacteria. We often find these in phagocytes, which are a type of white blood cell. So phagocytes will go and really capture these bacteria, bring them inside, and just devour them. So we're going to stop here for video 1 because we're running out of time. We'll finish up with the rest of the organelles, and then we will get into cell cytology.